Yes, and we are live on this rainy morning. Hello to my AP or HAVPA survey class. Yes. I hope that, well, you haven't gotten it yet. I am going to be publishing well, you should have gotten it, the Rabbit of Seville, if you noticed. I sent you a couple of videos this morning in addition to this one. These videos, they're worth watching, and once again, they appear, questions about them appear on your test. And, you just have to kind of watch, and it's not a difficult question. But it's a question that, proves that you watched it. And so, yeah. Right. There it is. Yes. And so today we are continuing our discussion over of the revolution and romanticism. And yesterday, shout out to Mr. Halleck, I debunked most of the myths about the heroism of the founding fathers, although that's not entirely true. Not entirely true at all. I mean, sure, they were brave men, because, it's one thing to talk about liberty, equality, and all those kind of good things. Quite another to sign a paper that basically means that if it goes south, you're going to hang as a traitor. And so, yeah, I mean, founding fathers were brave men, but at the same time, those brave men were not necessarily as purely motivated as our history books like to make out. History books are so important. They're so important, in giving a people a self-image of themselves, because oftentimes it can be the wrong image. And now I'm rambling, but I'll have a point eventually. Here's the thing, I've been watching a number of documentaries since this whole COVID thing happened, and one of the documentaries I was watching on KET was about Reconstruction, that period right after the American Civil War, and talked about, it basically then traced the attempt at Reconstruction all the way into, say, the 1920s, I think it was, from 1865 to 1920, something, until, yeah. And it talked about something that was very true, and that was that in the American South, after the Civil War, there was the deification, immortalization of what life was like prior to the American Civil War in the South. And I can attest to this because when I was a kid, because I went to grade school, and high school from 1962 to 1974. And, I read those textbooks because I was an avid reader, read those textbooks, and I would read about what life was like. And, these textbooks that were printed by, some companies and approved by the state of Alabama, and I'm sure textbooks in other states were just like them. And basically it talked about how in the American South prior to the Civil War, things for everybody was just not that bad. That, even for the African American slaves, their life was okay. After all, they were being civilized and things of that nature. And I remember reading about the great heroes of the Confederacy, in a textbook. And it talked a whole lot more about them than it did about Abraham Lincoln and people like that. And see, that's the thing, history is so important that you try to get as accurate a retelling as you can. Although Napoleon once said that history is a lie agreed upon by everyone. That's a terrible thing to think about. And yet, but I mean, I believe, and this is Johnny talking now, I believe that history should be accurate. Notice I'm not using the word truth. Truth is a philosophical statement. History should be accurate. In other words, say things as they were. And that's why I went off on George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, people like that yesterday, because the portrayal we are often given of those people is not accurate. I mean, because if we're going to tell the truth about the truth, did I say truth? If we're going to be accurate about the leaders of the Confederacy, and that is deserved, if we're going to be accurate about what the way people were treating the American South, African American, as well as the impoverished whites, let's also be truthful about the founding fathers, or what they were like. And so, yeah. And now I've spent 7 minutes rambling on. So yesterday I did finish your test. Well, okay, I didn't finish it. I got most of it done. You'll have your next test, which is on this unit, a week from tomorrow, May the 1st. Can you believe that? May the 1st. Well, anyway. Let's continue this unit. We're on Roman numeral 2, and hopefully you pulled your study guide up. If any of you do not have a study guide, please email me regarding that, and I will send you one. I normally try to put the study guide in the assignments, though. So, the Revolution, talking about the American Revolution, did come, and after a hard struggle against the foe, Great Britain, that had every material advantage, including the fact that, look at these stats. This is true. At any point in time during the American Revolution, no more than 1/3 of the population of the 13 colonies supported the revolution. Another third were fully in support of the British monarchy, of staying as part of Great Britain. And the other third of the 13 colonies, just like, people haven't changed that much. We're like, whatever. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. So, yeah. But even with that, with only 1/3 of the 13 colonists being in favor of revolution, eventually the revolution, to be real honest, Great Britain just went, whatever, dude, and walked off and left it. I mean, that's it. I mean, we do talk a lot about how the United States, the 13 colonies, won the American Revolution. I mean, once again, if you're going to be accurate, Great Britain just went, whatever, and walked out. I mean, had the British wanted to spend the money, spend the lives, and et cetera, I imagine the British could have, after a prolonged and very costly and unpopular war, have, eventually prevailed. But just like the United States in Vietnam, in the end, the war just cost too much. It was an unpopular war, and the United States and Vietnam just went, we're cutting our losses and getting out. Unfortunately for Vietnam, we didn't cut our losses and get out about 10 years earlier, but that's okay. No, it's not okay, but that's the way it is. All right. Independence was finally won in 1783, and then the problems of creating a government that could rule such a vast wilderness, because that's what, even in 1783, most of the 13 colonies had no road. It was a vast wilderness. And respect those aforementioned rights had to be conquered. By the way, as it says there, if 1/3 of the population of the 13 colonies supported the king, what proportion supported the American Revolution? Answer, another third. What proportion didn't lean either way and went, another third? Yes. So getting back to the problem of creating a successful government, at first the founding fathers created something called and Mr. Halleck, I'm sure you know this like the back of your hand, Mr. Pugh, the Articles of Confederation, which established the United States as basically a loose conglomeration of semi-independent states and literally had no chance of survival. So in other words, and I know you guys all know this because you took American history or are taking American history. But after the American Revolution was over with, it's not like we just hopped right into the constitutional car and went off on our way to being a country. No, there was a period of years where the United States, from 1783 to 1792, was under the auspices of this thing called the Articles of Confederation, which basically was kind of a mutual defense kind of treaty amongst the 13 former colonies, now, like I said, semi-independent states. With the great weakness was that for those 13 colonies, to get anything done, all 13 colonies had to agree. Well, you can't get 13 people to agree where to go to dinner, much less 13 independent or semi-independent states to agree to anything else. I mean, goodness, remember how tough it was to get the stimulus package through Congress? Anyway, in 1787, however, those same founding fathers, seeing their ship, meaning the 13 colonies, go down slowly, basically revamped the whole government, and by circumventing rules that already existed. You say, "What, Mr. Horton, what are you talking about?" Well, to change the American government under the Articles of Confederation, you were supposed to have the total agreement of all 13 of the agreeing states. All 13 had to agree. That was never going to happen. And so what the founding fathers did is said, okay, we'll change the government if we get 3/4, 9 of the 13 colonies to agree upon it, which basically is cheating. I mean, it's cheating. So, and that created the present Constitution, which, as you know, rules this country to this very day. And yes, please tell me, in case it pops up on your test, which it will actually, first president was that guy. I actually watched a very interesting documentary, Mr. Halleck, on the life of George Washington back about, I don't know, back in the good old days before COVID. It was presented by the History Channel. It's actually pretty good because I thought it did a pretty good job of being accurate and fair, talking about both George Washington's strengths as a leader, but also his failings. That, it was interesting when he talked about, if you ever seen pictures of George Washington, he's never smiling because his dental work was just horrible. And he wore false teeth made of hippopotamus tusk. that were really uncomfortable. But anyway, and that's just one thing. Ironically, the father of our country's first duty was to put down a rebellion in eastern Pennsylvania over that should be western Pennsylvania, over a federally imposed tax on whiskey, which is ironic because remember, this country was founded upon one of the major protests being what they call unfair taxation. And the first thing that George Washington had to do is to actually lead an army out there to put down a rebellion against taxes. This was called the Whiskey Rebellion, as Mr. Halleck knows. Of course, the Founding Fathers, probably so that they get the United States up and running, avoided one monumental question that would gnaw at the country whose very ideals were based on the value of the average man. And that issue was slavery. Yeah, I mean, you got to remember once again that when the Founding Fathers made this country, probably 50 to 60% of those Founding Fathers owned slaves. And that was part of their life. And so you really were not going to have a good hearing. You weren't going to have a good hearing. I'm sorry. Amongst them toward ending slavery, even though, Thomas Jefferson said all men are created equal, while he kept some 300 slaves in solitude. Anyway, and that question will not be solved except by the Civil War, 1861, 1865. Here's a question for you. Why do we have an electoral college? Electoral College. Yeah. Now, the more acutely in tune amongst you all know what the Electoral College is. The Electoral College is the process by which we elect the president. Now, I know that none of you have voted yet, but one day you will vote. Maybe some of you as early as this fall. And when you do, you are probably going to vote for the president. Here's the thing, though. When you vote for the president, you do not actually vote for the president. In the state of Kentucky, you vote for 8 guys or women or both called electors. 8. 8 is the number that you get when you add the 6 members of Congress who are from Kentucky, plus the 2 senators who are from Kentucky, and that gives you 8. So Kentucky has 8 electoral votes towards electing the next president. And when you vote for those guys. And what has happened in history on more than one occasion, including this last election, where the president of the United States, the guy who wins the election, becomes the president, does not have a larger number of popular votes. That means people like you and me, does not have a large number of popular votes than his opponent. That allowed several presidents throughout history to have minority, a minor number, a less than a majority of popular votes. Abraham Lincoln, Rutherford B. Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump had fewer popular votes than their opponents did. Why would we have a system like that? Well, here's the thing. We have a system like that because the founding fathers that we heap so much praise upon with being these glorious individuals, the founding fathers, and you got to remember that the 13 colonies looked a lot different in 1792. Founding fathers did not trust the people of this country because, to be real honest, people of this country, most of them were illiterate, couldn't read, and they did not trust them. They did not trust them to handle this all-important decision of who should be the next president of this country would be. But instead, you and I go vote for these electors, and the elector in turn is supposed to turn around and vote for the president of our choice. Although here's the big kicker. That guy that we vote for, those electors, are not bound legally. They do not have to vote for the person we want them to. Although that's only happened one time in history. In the election of James Madison. James Madison was going to become president of the United States by a totally unanimous vote. And therefore, there was this one elector, and I think it was in New Hampshire, maybe Massachusetts, one of the New England states, who maybe in Connecticut. And he made the decision that he did not want. He wanted to reserve the honor of being unanimously elected to be given to the first president, that being George Washington. And so this elector, whoever he was, and he was a school teacher, what's funny, he voted for himself. A vote that harmed no one. But yeah, so there was however many electoral votes for James Madison, and then one for Joe school teacher in Connecticut. Now the question is, why do we still have such a system? I mean, come on. The great majority of the population of this country are literate and are relatively informed and can make decisions. And well, to be honest, the reason why they still have the Electoral College is basically because the Electoral College supports the two-party system. Yeah, because when you go see that ballot, in November, you'll see the electors. There'll be a group of electors for the Democratic Party, a group of electors for the Republican Party, and then some for the minor parties. But what the two major parties are making sure of is that there pretty much won't be a third party candidate be president of the United States. And so that's why the political elites of this country keep the Electoral College in order because it keeps them in power. What is the result of that? Well, there's an old saying. God takes care of little children, drunks, and the United States of America. I can't say that's not true, even with some of the buffoons that we have had as president of this country. All right. So let's go on to Roman numeral 3, shall we? And first we talk about the American Revolution, then we're going to talk about the French Revolution. The French, many of whom were believers in the teachings of the Enlightenment and were inspired by the success of the American Revolution. Ironically, though, much of that success, the American Revolution, was bankrolled by the French king, Louis XVI. Louis XVI, the last king of the Bourbon dynasty, technically, Louis XVI actually loaned the United States for its revolution enough money to feed every peasant family in France for a year. And what did Louis XVI get out of that? Did he ever get paid? No, he got nothing. He got his head cut off. And ironically, one of the reasons that Louis XVI got his head cut off because the French government ran out of money. The government got bankrupt. which in turn caused his government to go bankrupt and in turn resulted in his beheading in the French Revolution. And so the French launched their own revolution against the tyranny and injustice of their government, where the royal family lived in unimaginable luxury, while the French peasants lived on the verge of starvation. Not at the verge of starvation. I mean, during this period of time that we're talking about, the latter part of the 18th century, starvation in Europe was a thing. People starved to death in Europe. Also, if you know anything about climate, Europe and North America at that time were going through something called the Little Ice Age, which meant that the winters were really brutally cold everywhere. And yeah, people died because of the cold, because of hunger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. While the rulers of France lived in this ginormous house and had their every whim taken care of. So, the French Revolution, which was much more of a civil war, and notice the next statements, lasted longer and was more violent. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped ahead, didn't I? Should be on part A. Forgive me, I'm getting... On July 14th, 1789, a large mob of Parisian city dwellers stormed an old fortress called the Bastille in search for weapons and gunpowder, and this was the beginnings of the French Revolution. Yeah. In August 1789, a legislative body calling itself the National Assembly joined together and signed a document that they call the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Basically, saying that everybody's equal. Nice idea. The French Revolution, Part C, once more of a civil war than the American Revolution. Although, to be real honest, go back to the American Revolution, a point that I need to make about the American Revolution. The American Revolution was a civil war too. I mean, you got 1/3 of the population of the 13 colonies who are for the revolution, 1/3 who are for the king. It's a civil war. And not only that, much of the current population of Canada today can trace their lineage back to these United States of America. Why? Well, because after the American Revolution, there was a great backlash against those people who had supported the king. Everybody likes to think that these are the stories that don't get told in American history. When the American Revolution ended, it wasn't like everybody shook hands, said, "Good game, man, I'll see you later." There was payback. And in the United States, in the 13 colonies, a lot of those people who had fought for the British crown when the English armies got back on the ships and headed out, they were on their own. And the people in this country were not generous to them. There were lynchings and hangings and burnings and murders, and simply a lot of people just had to leave. They were forced to leave. Where'd they go? Some went to England. Most went to Canada. Which is why, did you know that Canada considers the War of 1812 its war for independence from the United States? Yeah. And so, please, hopefully, Mr. Halleck, you heard that part, because that's going to be on your test, that thing about moving to Canada and retributions after the American Revolution. Yeah. So, yeah. As it says there, the French Revolution was much more of a civil war. It actually was much more of a civil war, because that's all it was. The French weren't necessarily fighting anyone at first from outside the country. It was a civil war. And it lasted longer, and it was actually more violent than the American Revolution, and was ended when Napoleon Bonaparte rose to the ranks of the depleted French army and seized power from the ruling and very corrupt Directory. The revolution is most remembered for the beheadings of Louis XVI, his hated wife Marie Antoinette, and Maximilian Robespierre, his as well. It was remembered for the Reign of Terror, where thousands of people were guillotined in a public spectacle. The murder of Jean-Paul Marat, the death of Marat, which I will send you a picture of. The Death of Marat is a romantic painting. It is by Jacques-Louis David. Please put in your notes, Death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David. And if you look at that picture, and I will send you that picture, the pose of Marat, he is like this, which is the same pose of Christ in the Pietà. Say again, when Marat paints this picture, when Jacques-Louis David paints the picture of Marat, he intentionally poses his body to look like the body of Christ in the Pietà by Michelangelo. Art imitates art. Yes, it does. The idea being that Christ was innocent, therefore Marat is also innocent. This guy Marat, he was nothing. He was not innocent, obviously. Marat was the publisher of a newspaper called L'Ami du Peuple, the Friend of the People. And all this newspaper published was, you know what, things would be great in this country if we just beheaded a few more people. And then he would go on to list people who should be beheaded. And guess what? In a few weeks, those people got beheaded. Yeah, he loved stirring up. I mean, you know, he was like some of these ultra extremist columnists and TV show people today who, you know, try to stir up hatred and animosity. But yeah, that's what he did. Now, he had a lot of people killed, and because of that, pardon me, and because of that, he was a target himself. Because of the fact that he made so many enemies, he was a target himself. You know, you can't go around being responsible for people's death and think that everybody's just going to let you do it. Especially when you're a guy who every day, because you have a skin condition. See, Marat, when he was a younger man, he was very poor, and he actually lived for several years in the sewers of Paris. And while living there, he contracted this skin ailment, a chronic skin ailment that was very painful. And the only way he could live with it was he became the only Frenchman to take a bath every day. And that's what he would do. He would spend hours sitting in a tub, soaking, because it made his skin soft and therefore palatable. And while he was in the bathtub, he would work. He had, you know, boards set across the top of the bathtub, and he would write and he would hand it off. And so one day, this woman, Charlotte Cordray, comes to Marat's house because everybody knew this is what he did. And under the pretense that she had a list of these conspirators, these people who needed to be executed because they were against the French Revolution. And when Marat is in the bathtub, he's like, give me the list. I've got no time for you. Instead of a list, she reaches into her corset and pulls out a stiletto, a poignard, a knife that basically, a shank. It's a stabbing knife. It's not a cutting knife. It's a stabbing knife, an ice pick. And she sticks him right here. And then puts a hole in his heart, drops a knife on the floor, and just sits there and waits for the authorities to come get her. She too was executed. But yeah, That is why that painting, and it's not only a painting, in fact, by the way, if you've ever been to Gatlinburg, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, the death of Marat is one of their more famous statues. They're wax statues. Anyway, who was Charlotte Corday? That was it. Charlotte Corday was the woman who stabbed him. Maximilien de Robespierre. Robespierre was the head of the Committee of Public Safety, and he was another person who made sure lots of people got executed. And in the end, he himself was executed. Ironically, Robespierre, after he had been busted and he himself was going to be executed, they put him under house arrest for 24 hours. And during the night, the guy actually gets hold of a pistol and tries to kill himself. And he either rethinks the decision or he's a bad shot, because he does not succeed in killing himself. He only succeeds in shooting his jaw off. And so, yeah. And finally, yes, Napoleon, whom we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay? But today I'm going to close, and I'm going to be sending you a lot of pictures. Well, not a lot, 2 pictures in particular. The death of Marat, for one. Yeah. And that'll be it, actually. And so, yeah. I will see you tomorrow. Hopefully you have a good day. It's a rainy day. One of my favorites, Mr. Hallett. So, yes, have a good day.